I've been trying to figure out for 3 weeks what my story was going to be, and I kept bouncing back and forth. Last week, driving down the road and looked out the window at the side of the road, and I thought, that's my story. So the story that I have chosen tonight is from the Comanche Nation, and it's one of their legends that has been told for years and years and years. Oh, Great Spirit, your people are hungry, and your people are dying. Your land is dry and barren, and your land is dying. Oh, Great Spirit, tell us what we can do to bring the rain back to our land. Tell us what we have done. This was what the dancers had been singing around the council fire for 3 days. They sang and they danced. And the people of the Comanche Nation would stand around and watch and wait and hope. But while they waited, the rains did not come, and the land did not come back to life. Sitting over by the side was a young girl. They called her She Who Is Alone. She Who Is Alone sat there with a doll in her lap. It was a warrior doll. He was made of buckskin. He had on his breeches. He had on a belt with a bone buckle. And his face was all painted with eyes and nose and a mouth that had been painted from the juice of the berries. And in his hair were bright, brilliant blue feathers. Feathers that came from the bird that called, Jay, Jay, Jay. She loved her warrior doll. And she talked to him while she sat there. And she said, we will soon know what to do. The shaman has gone to speak to the Great Spirit. He's out on the top of the hill. He's going to ask the Great Spirit what he has done to make the rain go away. And he's going to ask the Great Spirit what we must do to bring the rain back to our land. When that happens, we will know what to do. And the rain will come back. And the buffalo will come. And our people will be rich again. As she sat there, she began to think. She thought about her grandmother and her grandfather. And she thought about her mother who had made the warrior doll that she had in her lap. And she thought about her father who had brought the beautiful blue feathers from the bird to put in his hair. But all these were now shadows, because all had died in the beginning of the famine. That's when the people of the village named her She Who Is Alone. And the people of the village were now the ones that were watching after her and taking care of her. As the sun began to set, a messenger came running through the village, and he was yelling, the shaman has returned! The shaman has returned! And all the people began to make their way down to the council fire. They too wanted to hear what the shaman had found out from the great spirits. As they gathered around the fire, the shaman raised his hands and a quiet fell over the crowd. And the shaman said, I have been to the top of the hill, and I have talked to the great spirits, and I have listened to what they said. They have told me that the people have been selfish, and they have taken and taken and taken from the land for years and have never given back. And the great spirits are angry. The great spirits say that if you will take your most prized possession and offer it as a burnt offering, then you will be able to bring the rain back to your land. So now I need you to go to your teepees. Think about what the Great Spirit said. Talk about it. And then come to me when you have decided what is the great possession in the camp, and we will make the offering. She who is alone sat and thought. She had heard what the shaman said, and she looked at her doll in her lap. She knew what she had to do. But she waited as everyone began to walk away, and she heard one of the warriors say, "Well, I know he doesn't want my new bow." And one of the women, as she walked by, said, "I'm sure it's not my beautiful new rug that he wants." And she who is alone stayed quiet. And as everybody made their way to the teepee, she stood and made her way to the teepee where she sat, where she slept. She sat very quietly as the people in the teepee talked and discussed what they were going to do. Then everyone went to sleep, and the teepee flaps were closed, and she sat very still until everyone in her teepee was asleep, and the fire had died down. But there was one stick in the fire that still glowed bright red, and she very carefully took that stick, walked to the teepee flap, pushed it over, and stepped outside. The night was quiet. The only sound she could hear was the sound of the night bird off in the forest, the one with the red wings. She stood there for just a second. Then she turned, walked quietly out of the camp, and then ran to the top of the hill where the shaman had talked to the great spirits. She immediately took sticks and dried leaves and piled them up, took the fire stick and started a fire. Then she stood back and watched as the flames got larger. She took her doll and held it in front of her, and she said, "I know that you are what the great spirits need. You are my prized possession. You're all I have left of the time before, when my parents were here." And before she could change her mind, she stuck it into the fire very quickly. And then she watched it as it caught fire and burned. She sat there and watched until the flames died away, and then the ashes were cooled off. She remembered what they did when they made burnt offerings, when they would scatter the ashes to the four winds. So she took those cooled off ashes and she spread them to the north and to the east, to the south and to the west. And then she sat for just a moment and then laid down and went to sleep. She slept until the sunlight just came up over the hill. And when she stood and stretched and looked out over the hill, she was so surprised. Everywhere the ashes had fallen was bright, blue, brilliant flowers, the same color as the feathers that came from the bird that calls, "Jay, Jay, Jay." And as she stood and looked at the hill and all the hills around that were covered with the blue flowers, the people in the village began coming out of their teepees. They too saw the beautiful blue flowers. And they saw the young girl on top of the hill. So they began to walk toward her. And they all gathered on top of the hill and looked. Blue flowers as far as they could see. They knew that this was the forgiveness they had been looking for. And the great spirits had accepted the sacrifice. So they began to sing songs of praise and songs of thanks and celebration. And as they stood on top of the hill and sang their songs, a soft, warm rain began to fall. And the earth began to come back alive. At that time, they gave she who is alone a new name. And from that time on, she has been known as the one who dearly loved her people. And from that time on, every spring in the state that we now know of as Texas, the mountains and the hills are covered with the beautiful blue flowers in memory of a young girl who dearly loved her people.